Thank you, Peter. Brings us to our fourth and final speaker, Teodora Dechev. Teo is CEO and president of Untitled Capital. She has over 20 years' experience in the minerals sector and capital markets. She has such a long list of qualifications, but I picked out a few: MBA, a geology degree, and is also a licensed professional engineer. Welcome, Teo.
Great, thank you very much. Well, I have a little bit of a different take on the presentation, and I'm just going to run through kind of on a macro level what exploration does, and then specifically what Mandoro and our two entities here in Serbia are doing. So first, thank you for organizing another great event. It is very important for Serbia to be talking about natural resources, and why we are specifically here is on this slide. I'll start with mineral prospectivity. Without mineral prospectivity, you really don't come to countries to explore. But once you do have mineral prospectivity, then you really want good laws. And that, I think, is the foundation for Serbia. The next really important section is infrastructure. And infrastructure can include, rail, road, and as we saw earlier, access to ports. But at the end of the day, it's also being able to get that social license to operate. So this particular slide just outlines mineral project lifecycle. This gives you a sense of really how long it takes. And exploration doesn't necessarily guarantee a discovery, but once there is a discovery, it can take up to 20 years, and I have another slide to demonstrate that. And during that time, the majority of the time that people are out in the ground, there is no profitability, there is no cash flow, so there is a huge amount of risk, which is why it's so important to have jurisdictions like Serbia, which are open to mineral investment, understand the importance of mineral investment, and update their laws regularly in order to create a conducive environment for that. So what are some of the risks? There's a lot, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but maybe if we can just kind of home in on the jurisdiction, because it is ultimately a conference for Serbia. Mineral law stability is extremely important. And we've seen a lot of countries kind of go through ups and downs, and we've seen investment come in and out of those kind of jurisdictions. But specifically here in Serbia, it has improved, and we've seen it improve significantly over the last 7 years that we've been here. And the other interesting thing is that it's the access to the mineral rights. So it's one thing to change laws, but to make laws very clear in terms of how exactly you get into a mineral tenure and how you transition from exploration into ultimately exploitation. And the social license to operate. This is not necessarily something new. It's obviously something that the industry has been talking about. But specifically here in Serbia, you have 100 years of mining. And that is very rare. Essentially, you have 100 years of mining in Canada. And that kind of a relationship, a company cannot build on its own. That's a community effort. So I think it's really important to recognize that when you come into Serbia, you are actually experiencing a system that has had a lot of investment in educating local communities about the benefits of mining. So specifically risk analysis, this is, I think, an interesting slide. Last year in 2017, there was $7.8 billion spent on exploration globally, including everyone's budgets. So when you look at that and you dissect it, 1/3 of all of that capital went to 2 jurisdictions, Canada and Australia, who are both represented here. So I think we can speak to the fact that when you've got really strong mineral laws, you've got the ability to attain a social license, and you have good infrastructure, it really does attract very good capital. The next important slide is that Serbia is improving. This is actually something that I just picked out this morning. So the Fraser Institute is a very well-known organization who essentially asks mining companies about how are you doing in your local jurisdiction. They don't necessarily listen to outside groups. They really want to know how the local miners and explorers are experiencing. And Serbia is now ranked 4th in Europe. And as we all know, Finland and Sweden have really kind of held the top spots for the last decade or two. But Serbia has very quickly, in a very short amount of time, come up to rank 4th. And globally in the world is 31st. So I think that is a tremendous achievement that we shouldn't overlook. And what can that look like in the future? Well, this is essentially where it can go. Today in the Tethyan Belt, in the western portion of the Tethyan Belt, we have about 150 projects that are actually being invested in. Not specifically, there's a lot more mineral occurrences and there's a lot more licenses out there, but assets that are specifically getting advanced forward. When you look at that and recognizing that Serbia really just changed that mineral law for the first significant time in 2010, if you move forward, 6 years and they've already ranked 4th, and then when you look at a jurisdiction like Canada, where in Ontario and Quebec alone, you've got 2,600 projects. I mean, you can see the future for Serbia with mining, assuming that, of course, there's always a very good open rapport with the government and with the companies that do business here. This is an interesting slide. It demonstrates that it takes a very long time to get from discovery to production. Not exploration. You could be exploring for a very long time and not actually make a discovery. So what's interesting here is we've heard some of the speakers talk about their specific projects and how long it takes to get them into production. Sometimes it's metallurgical issues, sometimes it's social community issues, sometimes it's just mining method. But I think the important factor here is that to recognize you need a very large exploration community in order to create a good mining community. So that's something that we're always encouraging in Serbia. And this is, I thought, a really interesting slide as well. This basically shows you that, and it's a little bit hard to read, but if you look at copper discoveries that actually become mines, in the 1950s, if you look at the 15-year time frame, that's about 40% of those discoveries were eventually put into production. And as you give more time to these assets, obviously commodity cycles change, different conditions change, and so more of them get into production, and you get up to 68%. But today, in the 2000s, only 9% of discoveries are going into production. And so a big thing that we're asking ourselves as an industry is, why is that? What's slowing things down? And obviously, there's a whole number of factors, but I think what's important to remember is that there has to be a really good understanding between government and industry about what it takes to make a discovery and ultimately what it takes to then get it into production. And this is, I think, an important slide that really demonstrates what's going on and the role of exploration companies. So since the 1970s, we've seen a massive increase of the significance of exploration companies and discoveries. They're the ones who are raising the majority of the capital. They're the ones who are essentially putting the majority of the capital in the ground in order to create these kind of discoveries. And as you can see, state-owned companies essentially are completely phased out to the point where they are very rare in most countries. So specifically in Mindoro, what are we doing? We are in eastern Serbia, in the Tim Ik region. We are also in the Panagurista region, and we're also in the Rhodops. So we're not just investing in Serbia, we're investing in the entire region. We think that's important to make a discovery because you can never be sure where it'll be, where your next drill hole will go. But essentially, I'm just going to focus today on Tim Ik. And specifically with Tim Ik, this is the Tim Ik Magmatic Complex. It's obviously extremely well known, extremely well studied. We got involved in 2011 before Čukaru was discovered, and thank goodness it was, because I think it created a very important catalyst for recognizing Serbia and the potential that it has for more discoveries. So as a result, our land package that you see, which is the blocks numbered 1 through 8, is really the ground that we started picking up in 2011. And basically what we do is we focus on the concept of partnerships. It is very expensive to drill for these types of deposits. The capital markets is definitely not as supportive as it was in the past, and simply because it's very difficult to make a discovery. And so we've aligned ourselves with 2 partners, which are very important to us. The first is Japan Oil, Gas, Metals National Corporation, in short form JOGMEC, who is actually here with us today, so we're very pleased that they're here. And also recently announced Freeport-McMoRan. And really, essentially, what we're looking for in Serbia is porphyry and epithermal systems, not dissimilar from what Čukaru is. Čukaru was a blind discovery, 500 meters undercover, with a lot of dead holes before it was finally discovered. So it just shows you if you are persistent and if you have good exploration methodology and good capital supporting, there is really a very good propensity to find more discoveries here, specifically in the Tim Ik region. So the Tim Ik North projects are the ones that we have in partnership with JOGMEC, and currently this year we are drilling just over 7,000 meters. The lion's share of the drilling has gone to Borsko, which is the project directly west of the Bor system, and essentially that program will be completed by the end of this year, and then we'll have those announced results in early next year. The next area to look at is southern Serbia, or southern Tim Ik. This was an area that was overlooked until Čukaropeki was discovered. If you can believe this, the entire red and purple license areas was open ground that we staked directly from the government. And again, you know, the mineral prospectivity is what brings the exploration companies here, and then it's the government laws and the ability to operate is what keeps the companies here. Because we've seen many jurisdictions where companies go in for great prospectivity but aren't able to actually operate. So that's a very important factor. And then with Freeport specifically, there is currently a 3,500 meter drill program that's going on in 4 key areas, which is Tilvarosh, Markov Kamen, Orlovo, and Pretopenski, which I always get wrong, so excuse me for that. So in terms of actively investing, so this is just basically gives you an idea of where our exploration dollars are going, and you can see that it is evenly distributed between Tim Ik, Panagorishta, and the Rhodops. And so with that, that's the end of my presentation. This is one of our rig sites, and this is our 2 companies that are currently operating in Serbia.